Welcome to the University of Nottingham. It's arguable that the modern world began with a movement that we give the name, to which we give the name the Enlightenment. It's a movement of the 18th century that saw itself as light coming after a period of darkness, or, to use the German term, Aufklärung, where you're literally shining a light and clearing out something that needs the bathing effects of new and fresh light. With me is Professor Jeremy Gregory. Jeremy, you work on the 18th century. How significant for religion is the Enlightenment?
That's a very good question, and for a lot of my research I've had to battle against the understanding of the 18th century which put the Enlightenment centre stage. As you rightly say, our traditional vision of the Enlightenment was of a modernising, progressive force, the seedbed of our own contemporary era, and in that the one thing it had to get rid of was religion. Religion had no place in the modern world. It wasn't part of the Enlightened age. And that's certainly when I began my research in the mid to late 1980s, was the dominant viewpoint of the 18th century and its significance. The significance of the 18th century is it was the birthplace of the Enlightenment and thus the birthplace of modernity. Linked to the Enlightenment was that word secularization. So in a period which saw the birth of Enlightenment and the birth of secularization, what place did religion have? And I think what we've seen over the last 30 years or so is a modification in some cases, or even a complete reversal of that picture, where once we saw the Enlightenment as battling against religion across Europe and the wider world, we now see a much more nuanced relationship. And I think one of the models of the Enlightenment is the French Enlightenment, the Enlightenment of Voltaire, where he famously says, "Écrasez l'infâme," get rid of the infernal beast, get rid of the church, get rid of the clergy. They are the things that are holding back progress and modernity. And I think a point to make is that Voltaire is certainly not representative, or our image of Voltaire is certainly not representative of what's happening in France. He's certainly not representative of the European Enlightenment more broadly. And over, as I say, the last 30 years, we are seeing models which put Enlightenment and religion not as enemies, but actually going hand in hand. One of the great authorities on the British Enlightenment, he's very sadly died, the great Roy Porter, wrote a number of really blockbuster books talking about our conventional picture of the Enlightenment, where he presented this as a modern progressive force. But in a great essay which he wrote in 1981, which is on the Enlightenment in England, in a book on the Enlightenment in national context, he absolutely put forward the case that piety and reason could go hand in hand in England. And in fact, the clergy of the Church of England, who knew that they would be the main purveyors of the Enlightenment. So that has been one way in which my own research has followed Porter's lead on this, to see the clergy as not battling against the Enlightenment or being overwhelmed by the Enlightenment, but actually participating in some of the hallmarks of the Enlightenment. And I can just give you a few examples.
Please do.
Clearly reason is one of the badges of the Enlightenment. You have reason against misguided faith, reason against misguided emotion. Well, one of the buzzwords, one of the hallmarks of 18th century sermons would be the role and right use of reason in our understanding of religion and our understanding of the world. So for 18th century Anglicans, that misplaced enthusiasm, misplaced understanding of religion, which Enlightenment thinkers sometimes said was in the Church of England, they would say, no, the Church of England understands reason and its place in religion. It's Roman Catholicism, particularly foreign Roman Catholicism, which still has those evils of misplaced understanding. So the argument would be that Anglicans themselves are already enlightened. So that's important. Again, at another level, you could say that education is a great torchbearer of the Enlightenment period. And if you're trying to understand the Enlightenment underneath those great names of Hume, Diderot, Voltaire, Rousseau, if you can call Rousseau an Enlightenment figure, you'd say, let's look at the spread of literacy, let's look at the spread of education. And certainly within England and throughout Europe, it's the churches who are often leaders in those great educational enterprises. So I think for all sorts of reasons that model of Enlightenment versus religion is misleading. It's a construct of believing the words of those Enlightenment figures like Voltaire too much, taking them too seriously. And instead of that model, we should look for one where religion and Enlightenment go hand in hand. They're not at war, they're at peace.
There is actually an interesting, as you were telling me that, it dawned on me that enlightenment is one of these self-serving words. Everyone wants to think of themselves as enlightened.
Yes.
So as soon as I am enlightened, I have to other someone. I am enlightened, you're enlightened, them over there are not. So we also are rational, they're superstitious. We just have, we have our rational beliefs. Over there, it's irrationality. It's interesting that historians are only now, in the last few decades, realizing the level of othering that, to use a term, it's a term sociologists use, where you know, we're nice, it's them over there. That we're actually discovering that Enlightenment is a self-justifying rhetoric that just takes the bits you want and then others everything else.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And so we as historians have got to try to see beneath those labels, and often they're sort of self-given labels, and actually say we want to understand the Enlightenment properly, then we need to get rid of that and look at actually what's happening either in the intellectual sphere or the social and cultural sphere.
How much value is there in seeing the rationalist, seeing the Enlightenment and people who were devoted to reason as itself a form of religious cult? I'm thinking very much in terms of things like the statue of the goddess Reason that's put up after the French Revolution in Notre Dame in Paris.
I think that's absolutely true. It's its own kind of religion, indeed, and it operates in many ways like a religion with leaders, with followers, with doctrines. Reason, in that sense, becomes almost a theological doctrine for followers of the Enlightenment.
Well, certainly when it reaches its final expression in people like Kant, it is actually a philosophical doctrine. It is a doctrine. When he writes religion within the limits of reason alone, he is actually proposing a new religion, which is formulating its theological tenets within this world.
And Kant, we must remember, was an Orthodox Lutheran pastor.
At the same time.
Indeed, which is, they work together.
Jeremy, thank you very much for introducing this topic.